When I was a kid, I was always fascinated by those super hardcore dungeon crawlers, like the Wizardry series. However, they were too difficult for me to play back then. I looked for something less complex that might be a good point of entry into this genre, and found the NES game Swords and Serpents. With its auto-map feature and simple combat system, this game felt less daunting. Even though it's been over 2 decades since the last time I played it, I remember enjoying it. I don't think I've ever finished Swords and Serpents before, so I decided to give it another try and see if I can beat it this time. In this video, I'll be sharing my experience playing Swords and Serpents and reminisce about some old memories. Right from the get-go, I see the Interplay and Acclaim logos, which is a good sign since some good stuff came out of these companies during that era of gaming. The title logo is also pretty rad, with the snake coming out of the letter S. The opening music sounds a bit like an 8-bit rendition of a medieval tavern. This is a nice touch that gets you in the mood for the game. Probably because of how the sound font was programmed, Swords and Serpents has a very distinct sound that's hard to describe. Other NES games like Bart vs. the Space Mutants or Ghostbusters 2 had a similar sound. It feels like North American composers approached the NES sound chip differently, resulting in a tone that set their games apart from Japanese and European ones. The sound of these games might be a bit rough to some ears, but for me it's very nostalgic. It brings back memories of summer vacations, hanging out by the pool, and playing rented games all day. These games were pretty decent, but never really worth buying, perfect rental material. I have fond memories of playing those games. When you start a new game, the first thing you get to do is to choose the number of players. Even though this is a dungeon crawler, up to 4 players can play together. I can't think of many CRPGs from this era that supported multiple players. It's a really cool and innovative feature. However, since I played alone the whole time, I can't really say much about the multiplayer side of the game. Then, you get to create your party. You can either choose existing characters or create new ones. The default party consists of 2 magicians, 1 thief, and 1 warrior. These are the only 3 classes in the game. Since I prefer brute force over magic and wanted to pick new character names, I decided to create a fresh party. I also thought I might get lucky and roll better stats than the preset characters. There are only 5 stats: strength, intelligence, agility, health, and spell points. The role of these stats is pretty self-explanatory, and life and spell points are basically HP and MP. You can re-roll as many times as you want, and the maximum value for any stat is 14. Somehow, on my very first roll, I hit the jackpot with 2 14 and a 13. Needless to say, I wasn't about to re-roll after getting numbers like that. I got good stats for my other characters too, but I wasn't as lucky and had to re-roll several times. Once you've created your characters, you're ready to begin your adventure. You're dropped straight into the dungeon and have to figure out what to do. The first thing I noticed was the auto map on the right. This useful feature automatically draws a map as you explore the dungeon. It's really fun to complete the map of a floor before moving on to the next one. However, probably due to hardware limitations, only 2 floors are kept in memory. For example, if you move from the 1st to the 3rd floor, the mapping on the 1st floor will be deleted, and only the mapping on the 2nd and 3rd floors will be retained. Also, interactive elements such as traps and teleporters are not mapped. Therefore, I decided to draw my own maps. I use a program on Steam called Grid Cartographer. This is the best program I've found so far for drawing old-school, grid-based maps for dungeon crawlers. If you've never played a dungeon crawler before, I highly recommend drawing your own maps instead of looking them up online. I believe that's a big part of the fun of playing these games. But to be honest, for Swords and Serpents, I got tired of it pretty quickly and ended up looking them up online. The way I did this was once I'd finished mapping a floor, I allowed myself to view it online after it had been deleted when traveling 2 floors. I got tired of doing that too, and for the last few floors immediately looked them up online. There are teleporters called zoom tubes. Many of these take you back to the 1st floor. This is pretty useful if you need to heal or use the store, but it can also be very frustrating if you step on it by mistake. This is another good reason to just use online maps while playing this game. Next, let's take a look at the main part of the screen. The maze-like 3D dungeon on the left. Only the walls and doors of this dungeon are depicted, and they look the same for the whole game. That's to be expected from a game of this vintage. It's still better than the wireframe dungeons of the early 80s. Each floor has a different color. It may not seem like much, but it really helps give each floor its own atmosphere. But when it comes to graphics, it's really the monster and NPC sprites that steal the show. They're huge and fully animated. Sure, the way they move kinda looks like those creepy CDI Zelda games, but it's still cool. Like the walls of the dungeon, the enemies and NPCs change color on each floor. Some NPCs have pretty wild and unrealistic color palette. It looks like an Andy Warhol pop art painting from the 60s, like the Maryland Diptych. If you look at it that way, it's pretty cool, I guess. The goal of the game is to beat the final boss at the end of the 16th floor. It might sound simple, but but it's not just a matter of finding the stairs on each floor to move to the next. To progress through the game, you'll need to solve puzzles, unlock doors, find special items, use teleporters, and more. For example, there's a locked door on the second floor. You have to unlock it using a key you'll find on the third floor, so some backtracking is required. On another floor, you have to press switches in the right order. There are also a lot of invisible walls, and sometimes you have to find them to progress. Much of the game revolves around collecting 7 ruby items that let you access the final few floors. Since the game only keeps the mapping of 2 floors, finding them can lead to a lot of frustration. Because if you miss one, it's hard to figure out on which floor it is. Even when looking at maps online, it can get confusing. It almost made me want to give up on my goal of beating the game. But since I'm reviewing this game, I decided to push through and see it all the way to the end. The first few floors are pretty fun, but when I got to the ruby items part, I remembered why I never finished this game. Gathering all 7 ruby items is pretty tedious. The Passwall spell is another part of Swords and Serpents that convinced me to look up maps online. To progress through the game, you'll sometimes need to use a spell that lets you pass through walls. This spell doesn't work on every wall. This adds an extra layer of complexity to the game. Compared to all this, the battle system of Swords and Serpents is pretty simple. You just press the A button to attack until all enemies are defeated. You can also use the control pad to target a specific part of the enemy, adding a bit of strategy. For example, pressing up to attack the head deals more damage, but has a higher chance to miss. Some monsters have specific vulnerabilities. The magician can use a wide range of spells during battles. These spells can be found by exploring the dungeon. This adds a bit more depth to the battle system. As you make your way deeper into the dungeon, the enemies grow noticeably stronger. Therefore, in order to survive, you have to improve your party. To do this, you must defeat monsters to level up or get better gear. One way to get better gear is to buy it from stores. There's a shop on the first floor that sells a sword called Sword 2. It's extremely expensive, so you'll have to spend a good amount of time grinding if you want to buy it early. I like that the game gives players who enjoy grinding an incentive to do it. I ended up buying it for all the characters who could equip it. I spent time fighting monsters near the Monk Temple, a place where you can heal your party. Each time my HP dropped too low, I'd return to the temple, heal up, and head back out to grind some more. I had a lot of fun doing that. On the topic of gear, I can't help but think of another issue. Swords and Serpents gives you very little room in your inventory. As a result, it fills up very quickly. Because item drops are so frequent, you'll find yourself constantly managing your inventory and throwing things out to make space. Item management could have been a fun part of the game if you didn't get so many items all the time, or if there were a place to store them. Also, it doesn't help that menu navigation is extremely sluggish. Each time you press a button, there's a noticeable delay. It feels like playing on one of those old HD TVs with terrible input lag, maybe even worse. That's probably due to the NES hardware straining to process everything happening in the game. That said, my brain got used to it after a while, so it didn't bother me too much. We still haven't talked about why we're exploring this dungeon in the first place. As with many games from that era, the story isn't told in-game, you have to look it up in the instruction manual. The premise is simple: delve into the maze and defeat an ancient serpent that's been terrorizing the land for generations. The instruction manual doesn't say much more than that. While the game contains a decent amount of text, it mainly serves as hints to help you progress through puzzles. It's a shame they didn't use some of that text space to give the story a little more depth. The story is very bare bones, even for a NES game. I was expecting a bit more since this is an RPG, not a platformer or a sports game. I've spent much of this review highlighting some of Swords and Serpents' weaker points. In spite of its shortcomings, I genuinely had fun playing Swords and Serpents, especially during the early parts of the game. However, given how intricate and confusing the maps can be, this isn't the best entry point for someone new to dungeon crawlers. For newcomers, I'd suggest trying Shining in the Darkness on the Sega Genesis. It's much more approachable. Another good option is Arcana for the SNES. It's a fun and more accessible take on the genre. But if you're looking for a game with complex maps and cool 8-bit graphics, then Swords and Serpents might be your cup of tea. This concludes my review of Swords and Serpents. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video.